After signing the Declaration of Independence in 1776, the 13 former American colonies had an identity crisis.
It was one thing to declare independence. It was another to figure out exactly what you were now that you'd declared it. And people didn't really know what this new sort of bunch of former colonies, soon-to-be states, was going to be. No one knew. It was completely up in the air.
At the time, the governing body was the Continental Congress. In 1777, this Congress took an important first step to unite the former colonies by drafting the Articles of Confederation.
They decided there needed to be some kind of organized something at the center of all the colonies, but it couldn't be too strong because they were breaking away from a government that felt too strong. So they created a confederation of states in which individuals from the different states would be kind of like diplomats, all together in one body, and they could deal with things like foreign affairs and things that involved all of the states together. Things that had to do with what was going on inside the states, they left alone to the states.
In just a few years, it's clear that the Articles of Confederation don't provide enough power to a centralized government. In fact, the Confederation Congress had so little centralized power, the state delegates often didn't bother to show up to vote.
Things came to a head in 1786 with a rebellion of farmers in Massachusetts who didn't want to pay their debts. It was called Shays' Rebellion. It ended up being almost impossible to put down. The Confederation Congress really ended up being unable to do anything, and it led a lot of people to think, maybe we better do something to strengthen the government or everything is going to fall to pieces.
So in 1787, the Constitutional Convention convened to strengthen the central government. After much wrangling, the Constitution was written in an attempt to create a more perfect union between the states.
One of the amazing things about the Constitutional Convention was something that people at the time recognized. They knew that most governments were the result either of chance or war. And they knew that what they were doing was sitting in a room and calmly trying to create a good government. They knew it was something that felt unique in world history, and if they failed at what they were doing, they all believed that this would be the general misfortune of humankind. It would be proving for all time that you couldn't create a government with calm debate, but that you would forever be subject to chance and war.
To protect against giving the central government too much power, the delegates writing the Constitution added something groundbreaking, a Bill of Rights that limits the power of federal government in the U.S. and protects the rights of all citizens. On September 17, 1787, the final form of the Constitution was approved at the Constitutional Convention, then ratified the following June. 200 years later, that Constitution still governs the United States.
In this 5-part unit, we will explore the creation of the Constitution and the origins of the Bill of Rights. We will also examine the roles of key leaders in the formation and implementation of these important American documents. In Part 1, we will learn about 2 attempts by the framers of the Constitution to establish a workable government based on Republican principles. In Part 2, we will see that the Constitution of the United States established a government that shared power between the national government and the state governments, protected the rights of the states, and provided a system of orderly change through amendments to the Constitution itself. In Part 3, we will explore 2 early Virginia statutes that influenced the major principles of the Bill of Rights of the Constitution. In Part 4 of this unit, we will examine some important ideas of the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists that are reflected in the contemporary political debate on issues such as the size and role of government, federalism, and the protection of individual rights. In Part 5, the final section of this unit, we'll study 3 very important legal precedents established by the Marshall Court between 1804 and 1824 that strengthen the role of the United States Supreme Court as an equal branch of the national government. In Section 1, we will explain the origins of the Constitution, including the Articles of Confederation. Focusing questions. 1. How did America's pre-revolutionary relationship with Britain influence the structure of the first national government? 2. What weaknesses in the Articles of Confederation led to the effort to draft a new constitution? Main idea. American political leaders, fearful of a powerful central government like Great Britain's, created the Articles of Confederation and adopted them at the end of the war. The Articles of Confederation were adopted by the Continental Congress in 1777 and ratified in 1781. The document served as the first Constitution of the United States. It was designed to prevent the concentration of too much power in a centralized government. Here are 6 weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation that you'll need to know. 1. Provided for a weak national government. 2. Gave Congress no power to tax or regulate commerce among the states. 3. Provided for no common currency. 4. Gave each state 1 vote regardless of size. And 5. Provided for no executive or judicial branches.
Don't blink.
In Section 2, we will identify the major compromises necessary to produce the Constitution. We will also examine the roles of James Madison and George Washington at the Constitutional Convention. Focusing questions. How did the delegates to the Constitutional Convention balance competing interests? Number 2. What compromises were reached at the Constitutional Convention? Key issues at the Constitutional Convention and their resolutions. Issue number 1. Federal law versus state law. Which body of law outranked the other, state or federal? The Constitution made federal law the supreme law of the land when constitutional, but otherwise gave the states considerable leeway to govern themselves. Issue number 2. Large states versus small states. Since large states had more people and more money, should they have more power than small states? The Constitution balanced power between large and small states by creating a Senate, where each state has 2 senators, and a House of Representatives, where representation is based on a state's population. Issue number 3. Determining a state's population. When determining a state's population, who gets counted? The Constitution allowed Southern states to count slaves as 3/5 of the population when determining representation in the United States House of Representatives. Issue number 4. Power of the federal government. What is the best way to create a strong central government but limit its powers? The Constitution avoided creating an overly powerful central government by establishing 3 co-equal branches of government: the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch, and by creating numerous checks and balances among them so that no single branch became more powerful than the other 2. The powers of the federal government are limited to those either directly identified or implied in the Constitution. Key leaders at the Constitutional Convention. George Washington was the president of the convention. He presided over the convention, and he didn't really talk much. He seldom participated in the debates. He lent his enormous prestige to the proceedings there. James Madison. James Madison has become known as the father of the Constitution. Madison, also a Virginian, was a brilliant political philosopher, and he often led the debate and kept copious notes of the proceedings there. These notes became the best record that historians have today of what actually transpired at the Constitutional Convention. At the convention, he authored the Virginia Plan, which proposed a federal government of 3 separate branches: legislative, executive, and judicial, and became the foundation of the structure of our modern government. Madison later authored much of the Bill of Rights.
Wibbly wobbly, timey wimey stuff.
In Section 3, we will examine the significance of the Virginia Declaration of Rights and the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom in the framing of the Bill of Rights. Focusing question: how was the Bill of Rights influenced by the Virginia Declaration of Rights and by the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom? Main ideas. James Madison consulted the Virginia Declaration of Rights and the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom when drafting the amendments that eventually became the United States Bill of Rights. The Virginia Declaration of Rights, written in 1776 by George Mason, reiterated the notion that basic human rights should not be violated by governments. The Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, written by Thomas Jefferson and passed by the Virginia General Assembly in 1786, outlawed the established church, which means the practice of government support for one favored church. It is a statement about freedom of conscience and the principle of separation of church and state.
Bow ties are cool.
In Section 4, we will assess the arguments of Federalists and Anti-Federalists during the ratification debates and their relevance to political debate today. Focusing questions. Number 1. What were the major arguments for and against the Constitution in the most popular Federalist and Anti-Federalist writings and in the ratification debates? Number 2. Who were the leading Federalists and Anti-Federalists in the pivotal ratification debate in Virginia? Main ideas. Federalists advocated the importance of a strong central government, especially to promote economic development and public improvements. Today, those who see a primary role for the federal government in solving national problems are heirs to this tradition. Anti-Federalists, on the other hand, feared an overly powerful central government destructive of the rights of individuals and the prerogatives of the states. Today, conservatives echo these concerns. The leading Virginia opponents of ratification were Patrick Henry and George Mason. The leading Virginia proponents of ratification were George Washington and James Madison. In the final section of this unit, Section 5, we will evaluate how John Marshall's precedent-setting decisions established the Supreme Court as an independent and equal branch of the national government. Focusing question: how did Chief Justice John Marshall, a Virginian, contribute to the growth of the United States Supreme Court's importance in relation to the other branches of the national government? Main ideas. The doctrine of judicial review was established in the 1803 case of Marbury v. Madison. The doctrine of implied powers was established in McCulloch v. Maryland in 1819, and a broadly national view of economic affairs was established in the 1824 case of Gibbons v. Ogden. The rulings in these three cases are the foundation of the Supreme Court's authority to mediate disagreements between the branches of government, levels of government, and competing business interests.